The morning the cold came down from the mountains like a slow-moving ghost, Ellie Wade walked along the frosted path with her shawl pulled tight around her thin shoulders. Snowflakes drifted lazily, catching on the strands of her silver hair. The world was quiet in that way winter knows, where even a heartbeat feels like it echoes. And if you'd been standing there, watching her shape bend against the wind, you might have thought she were something carried by it, something weightless and half-forgotten. I remember thinking once that some folks walk this earth like they're apologizing for being on it. Ellie was one of them, a woman who moved like a memory instead of a person. A woman the town had stepped around for so many years that she'd started believing she weren't worth stepping toward. Silas Boone had been riding down from the high ridge that same morning, leading his sorrel packhorse through the whitened brush. He spotted her first as a blur of gray and blue against the drifting white, her figure small in the vast, cold world. He didn't call out, just watched her for a long, still moment, the way a man watches a wounded creature unsure whether to approach or keep respectful distance. Ellie reached the mercantile before he did. She stepped inside, shaking off snow as quietly as she lived her life, and he followed a minute later. She was struggling with a heavy sack of flour, her hands trembling, knees straining. A younger woman might have had the strength or the pride to snap at someone staring. But Ellie just lowered her head and kept wrestling with the weight. Silas stepped forward, steadying the bottom of the sack with one large, calloused hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't heroic. It was simply help, the way decent folk used to give without expecting praise. Ellie's voice came out soft, roughened by years of swallowing tears she'd never let fall. "Thank you, sir. I ain't worth much trouble." Silas lifted his eyes to hers, gray meeting gray, mountain and winter recognizing each other. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "weight ain't what makes something worth carrying." But she flinched like he'd spoken blasphemy. That's what happens when kindness hits a person who's only ever known the sting of the opposite. They don't know where to put it. Gossip stirred behind them, whispers rustling like dry corn husks. "Look at her. Someone help pin old Ellie." Silas Boone must be desperate. Her cheeks flushed with shame, and Ellie fled the mercantile before the sack had fully settled in Silas's hands. That night, in her tiny shack at the town's edge, Ellie sat beside a flickering oil lamp, her bones aching from the cold that seeped through the warped boards. The wind tapped against the window like an old friend she never asked for. She held her hands close to the flame, watching the shadows move across her face, deep lines carved by disappointment, not age. She had once been someone, a wife, a woman with soft hands and softer dreams. But her husband had found a younger woman, one who laughed brighter and didn't carry the weight of barren years. He'd left Ellie with 2 dresses, a kettle, and a heart that felt like it had been scraped clean. "Worthless," he'd muttered the day he walked out. The town had agreed. As the lamp dimmed, Ellie whispered to herself, so quietly the darkness almost didn't hear it. "Worth ain't for the likes of me." But somewhere in the hills, Silas Boone was still thinking about her. A woman worn thin by life, but standing anyway. That sort of thing leaves a mark on a man who's lived long with his own regrets. The next morning the gossip wheels turned as they always did. Mabel Crowder, whose tongue never froze even when everything else did, saw Silas in town and pounced. "You a skin after that silver-haired woman?" she croaked, eyes sharp as needles. "Ellie Wade, why you both errand with old scraps like her?" Silas said nothing at first. People like Mabel didn't deserve words. But he finally asked, "Where does she live?" in a voice so quiet it unsettled her. Mabel spread the news by afternoon. "That mountain man must be starved for company. Maybe he's crazy. Ellie Wade? Lord help him." Ellie overheard at the laundry shed, and humiliation washed over her like dirty water. She hurried home, shrinking deeper into herself, hating that she'd drawn attention to a man who didn't deserve it. But Silas found her anyway, by accident or fate, no one knew. She was outside her shack trying to fix a broken hinge when he walked by leading his packhorse. She straightened, startled, wiping her hands on her apron as though a mountain man cared about rust stains. He nodded once, slow, respectful. "Good morning, Miss Wade." She murmured something close to a greeting, though her voice wavered. He didn't speak right away. Men like Silas knew the value of silence. Instead, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a small wooden carving of a pine tree, whittled smooth, with a trunk shaped by a sure and patient hand. "Thought maybe this might cheer up your window," he said, offering it like it were nothing. Ellie stared at it as though it were gold. No one had given her anything in years, not even a kind word she didn't have to pay for. Her throat tightened. "Sir, I ain't worth much." Silas looked at her then, not at her worn dress or frayed shawl, not at her hair more silver than white, but at her, the quiet ache behind her eyes, the courage it took to still be gentle in a world that had been anything but good to her. "You're worth more than you've ever been told," he said softly. The words hit her like a warm hand on a long frozen cheek. She didn't know what to do with them, didn't know how to keep them or trust them. So she simply stood there as he walked away, the carving trembling slightly in her fingers. When he disappeared over the ridge, Ellie placed the pine carving in her window, where the weak winter light could touch it. She sat on the edge of her bed afterward, hands folded in her lap, feeling a strange warmth spreading in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since girlhood. It frightened her. It comforted her. It reminded her she was still alive. And for Ellie Wade, that was the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name, but something her heart had been waiting for all the same. Snow had crusted the streets by the time Ellie made her way into town again, her basket of folded laundry digging into her arm. The cold was sharp, bright, the kind that made every sound carry a little farther than it should. Folks were out despite it, boots scraping across the boardwalk, breaths puffing in white clouds. Ellie kept her eyes low, hoping to slip in and out unnoticed. But life rarely let her stay invisible. Ansel Crowder spotted her first, leaning against the post outside the saloon, a man who enjoyed the small cruelty of picking at those already worn down. "Well, look here," he drawled. "Town's old rag herself. Wind ain't blown you away yet." A couple of men chuckled. Ellie stopped dead, shame tightening her throat like a rope. She wanted to turn back, to run home, to disappear into her small shack where no one could see her trembling. But before the words fully settled, Silas Boone stepped out of the alley beside the saloon, his heavy boots creaking against the icy boards. He said nothing, just placed himself between Ellie and Ansel with a quiet that cut sharper than any threat. Ansel's grin faltered. "You defending her?" He scoffed, incredulous. "She ain't worth." "Careful, Crowder," Silas murmured, voice low, controlled. "Cold wind carries words. Might bring him back round to your own doorstep." A hush fell over the boardwalk. Not fear, just the unmistakable hum of judgment, of gossip tightening like a net. Ellie felt it pressing on her chest until she could barely breathe. "Leave be, Silas," she whispered, voice shaking. "I ain't worth fighting over." Silas turned then, fully, looking her in the eyes with a gentleness that made her knees weaken. He knelt as if to steady her, or maybe just to be level with her shame. "Ellie Wade," he said, the cold steam of his breath mingling with hers, "you are worth every good thing this world still got left." "I see it plain." Ellie felt herself unravel inside. Threads tugged loose after years of being knotted by cruelty. She backed away, not because she wanted distance, but because she didn't know how to hold so much care without breaking. Town gossip flew like startled birds before noon. Someone claimed Silas was planning to court the old woman. Someone else said Ellie must have tricked him. Marshal Tom Burdett stopped Silas outside the blacksmith's later that day. "You're stirring, dust folk don't want disturbed," the marshal warned. "They don't like when their picture of a person changes." Silas just shrugged. Dust only bothers them who ain't clean with themselves. But Ellie heard the gossip too. Every whisper became another stone laid on her back. By evening she'd pulled her curtains tight and blown out her lamp early, sitting alone in the dark like she'd been taught to do whenever hope came too close. She told herself Silas was better off not being tangled with her. She told herself she should fade again, let him go, let the world right itself. Shame has a way of sounding like wisdom when it's been with you long enough. The storm hit 2 nights later. It came fast, sliding down from the mountains like a living thing, snow whipping sideways, wind rattling shutters, the world turning white and wild. Ellie heard the sudden gust tear at the wash she'd left on the line. Foolishly, instinctively, she stepped outside to save it. The moment her foot touched the icy porch step, she slipped. Pain shot through her hip as she struck the boards. Her breath burst out in a cloud that was snatched immediately by the wind. Snow swirled, stinging her face, settling on her hair, her dress, her hands. She tried to rise, but her leg wouldn't hold. The cold crawled fast, merciless, creeping in her bones. Maybe this is how folks like me go, she thought as her vision blurred. Quiet, unnoticed, carried off by the wind. Far across the storm-thickened dark, a lantern swung like a wandering ember. Silas Boone was fighting his way through the blizzard, calling her name only when the wind lulled enough to let a voice travel. We found her half buried against the porch rail. He didn't waste breath with shock or fear. He knelt, scooped her carefully into his arms, bundled her inside his coat like something precious. Snow clung to his beard, melted against her cheek as he ran with her through the storm. His cabin door banged open, warm lamplight spilling out like a savior. He lowered her near the fire, his hands steady as he brushed snow from her hair, wrapped blankets around her, rubbed warmth back into her fingers. Ellie's voice came small, cracked. Why do you care this much? I ain't worth much, Silas. Folks been saying that my whole life." Silas paused, his thumb brushing the back of her trembling hand. His eyes softened in that quiet mountain way. A man who had loved and lost, who understood what loneliness carved into a soul. "Ellie," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "you're worth everything to me." The words settled on her like a snowfall that warms instead of chills. "Because you're kind," he continued. "Because you survived. Because you kept being gentle in a world that tried its damnedest to harden you." Her breath hitched, and tears, real ones, hot ones, finally rose after years of being locked away. She bowed her head as though afraid the moment would break if she looked at it too long. Silas stayed close, not holding her, not crowding her, just there. A quiet presence, a steady warmth, a promise without need for a single vow. The next days passed like the slow opening of a winter bud. Silas made simple meals, and Ellie folded his blankets with careful hands. She was shy with her gratitude, unsure how to show it. He was gentle with his silence, unsure how to rush nothing. They moved around each other the way two people do when they're learning to breathe beside someone else, soft, mindful, grateful. One morning, Ellie stepped outside Silas's cabin and stared at the mountains stretching like sleeping giants beneath a sky washed clean by the storm. Her shoulders rested lower, her back straighter, something unspoken and long suppressed, alive in her eyes. Silas joined her on the porch, not touching, not speaking, simply offering the quiet company of someone who's chosen to stay. Ellie looked at him, then at the rising sun casting gold over the snow. She took his arm, not for balance, not for fear, but because she wanted to, and that small gesture, light as breath, warm as fire, felt like the world shifting beneath them, setting everything right again. If you'd been standing there, watching them framed against the mountains, you might have understood what folks often forget. That love doesn't always come young or easy. Sometimes it finds you late, when the world has nearly convinced you you're invisible. Sometimes it saves you right when you've stopped waiting to be saved. And if you're hearing this now, let me leave you with the truth that carried Ellie Wade back into the light. Worth ain't something the world gives you. It's something you finally let yourself believe. And somewhere, in some quiet corner of your life, there's a Silas waiting. Someone who will see you the way Ellie was seen, when she finally lifted her face toward the warmth and realized she deserved it all along.